Sitting, eating, drinking. that we can do.
We're very well expert.
Looking for it.
I'm going to have to log out and log back in. If I just take this to the side. Yeah, that's what I mean. I come back in like half a second. Hang on.
Good morning.
Hi, how are you doing? It should take me 2 minutes. Good.
Okay, good. Good luck.
Good to see you.
Michelle,
How are you?
Hello. How are you doing? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
very good.
Nice to meet you. Enchanté, Martin, are you happy with the meeting? Today's meeting?
Right, good morning everybody. If you'd like to take your seats. I knew we shouldn't have offered Danish pastries because then you can't get anybody to leave the coffee room and come and join the meeting.
Healthy walk. Sure.
Liam? Very good, thank you. Welcome everybody. I'm Simon Maxwell. For those of you who couldn't tear yourself away from the Danish pastries, the good news is that we are offering lunch at the end of the meeting, which may be an incentive to concentrate for the next 2.5 hours. Some of you will know that this is my last public event as director of ODI because I stand down at midnight on Thursday after 11.5 years in the best job in international development in the UK, except for whatever job I find to do next. It is interesting clearing out one's papers and reflecting on the past. As I was clearing out my papers, I discovered large numbers of policy papers written at different times during more than the last 10 years, all of which set very ambitious goals for something like 5 years ahead. So I have a pile of papers written in 1975, which are called things like Eliminate Malnutrition by 1980. And then in 1980, there's the next pile, which says Eliminate Malnutrition by 1985, and so on. And here we are still with 1 billion people malnourished. And several of these piles of papers, it turns out, relate to the European Union. Reform the structure of the Commission by 1985. Reform the structure of the Commission by 1990. And in fact, I found a handwritten letter from Hilary Benn when I was clearing up, which was written to acknowledge a piece I'd done in The Guardian in 2004, which was about the need to reform the Commission and sort out the financing of European aid at the time of the last Commission. So it's refreshing and reassuring to know that there is a continuity in our discussions. And one of the lessons I've learned as a researcher is that the way to keep yourself out of trouble is to say the same thing over and over again, which more or less I've been doing on Europe since 1982 when I first started writing on the subject. But the other thing I've learned is the importance of not just talking about why or what changes are needed, but also to talk about how change happens and to think about how we put together alliances of like-minded people who will deliver change. And ODI, being a think tank, is particularly concerned with that issue of how you produce change. And those two interests come together because although it's true that we've been writing about European development cooperation in 1980 in my case, in 1985 and 1990 and so on, actually this is the year where there really is, I said this in 1985 as well, but this is the year when there really is an opportunity for significant change. And 2009 is marked by two phenomena. The first is that the global economic crisis has really focused our minds on what development is about. Last year we had the fuel crisis and the food crisis. This year we have the financial crisis and the rollout of a recession to developing countries. We see increasing pressure through climate change, and we are, in various circles and in various countries, rewriting the development agenda. And one of the key conclusions that comes out of that rewriting is that the development agenda is moving in a direction which is transnational in nature. These problems cannot be solved by countries acting alone. They require international collective action. And that means putting right at the heart of our discussion this year questions about the multilateral institutions, the reform of the IMF, and the World Bank has been very much on the table this week in Washington. The EU, a crucial part of it, the EU deal on climate change and the negotiating position going up to Copenhagen, EU action on the fiscal stimulus, EU action on the development package, which we'll talk about shortly. This is a moment for the multilateral institutions, and I think of the EU as being one such, a close partnership between us in Europe. The other driver of change in 2009 is the timetable. Next month we have European elections. You wouldn't think so, reading the papers, but actually there are elections for the European Parliament in June. There will be a decision about the Lisbon Treaty later in the year, and if the Lisbon Treaty is passed, subject to Irish and some other agreement, there will be a new double-hatted foreign minister, there'll be a common external action service, a unified diplomatic service, there'll be a different number of commissioners, possibly there'll be a number of other organisational changes. There's a fundamental budget review going on, which will prepare the way for substantial reallocations. Of course, there'll be a new commission after the elections, and that gives the opportunity to reshape the way in which the commission works, looking at these relationships between foreign policy and development policy, thinking also about how we organise within the development sector the relationship between DG development, external relations, and the implementation side, EuropeAid. This is the year in which we can get things done in Europe. We know roughly why, because the development agenda drives us in that direction. We have some ideas about what, although they're not necessarily complete. And now for the first time, we're really putting energy into how. And this process started before Christmas at a chateau outside Paris called Ermenonville, under the leadership of Jean-Michel Severino, who is the Director General of the Agence Française de Développement, who brought a group of us together to talk about the future of European development cooperation and create a group of what we describe as change makers, who are from different countries and different sectors, parliamentarians and fonctionnaires and researchers and think tank people like some of us, and NGO people trying to put together a coalition that will make change happen. I think this is really exciting and really important and offers an opportunity to do things differently in a way that we haven't done in the past. And Jean-Michel, you deserve great credit for leading that process and taking it forward. We started our work on Monday evening. We had Gareth Thomas representing the UK government and Gunilla Carlsson, who is the Swedish Minister for Development Cooperation and will assume the development presidency of the EU on the 1st of July. So there is a political leadership to this. We then had the whole day in this room yesterday. I got a terrible allergy to something in this room, so if you start sneezing, don't panic, it's not swine fever, I think it's the curtains. And there's a Boots just up the road if you need one, I discovered yesterday. And I said to the cashier as a joke, I think this might be swine fever. The whole of the Boots emptied in 5 seconds. And yesterday we spent a good deal of time with a group of people, some of whom are here from these different countries and sectors, as I mentioned, thinking through what the agenda should be and coming at the end to the really important question of how do we get this done? We know what the timetable is, we know what the decisions are, how do we make sure that we have the right kind of package to deliver to policymakers so that they can make decisions we think are the right ones. We're going to report on that meeting today, but we're also going to open up a further conversation, and this is part of the business of trying to build some sense of forward movement and consensus, having this meeting in London, and we hope there'll be others in other places. Martin Dinham, who is Director General of DFID, is going to give a kind of keynote which will set out what we think the issues are, and then we have 4 discussants, not quite the ones billed, to do with personal issues, illness, and one poor chap had his house burgled and lost everything and had to go back and try and sort it out. I won't tell you which of the speakers that was. But we do have 4 excellent speakers representing different sectors. First of all, all of my good friends, I won't say my good friend Dirk, but everyone, Dirk Messner is an extraordinary director of the German Development Institute. He has taken the lead internationally on global governance issues, and he and I have done a number of things together at his instigation in the German press on UN reform and on global governance more generally, and he has worked very closely with me and others on these EU issues. Martin, I've already introduced, Jean-Michel Severino, running the very large French agency, and we must talk a little bit during the course of the morning about the fact that the French have a very strong aid programme which does things slightly differently to the UK. I think a greater interest in loans, slightly more cautious on budget support, for example, and these are real differences of emphasis that are worth, are perfectly defensible, but are worth discussing as we go forward. Richard Shear, who's a senior economist in the African Development Bank, speaking, if you like, for Africa. Although I guess you're about as African as I am, actually, originally. What's your nationality?
Well, my nationality is actually Dutch, but I'm not so sure if this counts or not. I actually grew 2/3 of my life in Africa.
And your wife is Japanese, so...
Yeah, I know, that one doesn't help, huh?
And finally, Paul Engel, who, as everyone will know, runs the European Centre for Development Policy Management in Maastricht, which has developed a particular niche, brokering relationships between Europe and the African, Caribbean and Pacific nations, but now has a wider policy remit covering European development policy, extraordinarily knowledgeable, well-informed and effective in exactly this question of managing the change process. So we couldn't have a better panel, although we might have tried to find a female to join the panel, but you do what you can, which apparently is not very much. We're going to start with Martin and ask you to give us the keynote. There are some very good background papers, I want to say, before I hand over, sorry Martin, that I hope you picked up, 2 or 3 in particular. One is the background paper for the conference, which is by Michaela Gavras, who was with Bond and then with Oxfam and then with DFID and is now, I'm very happy to say, working with ODI, which sets out where we are in the development scene, what's on the agenda this year, what are the challenges to EU development cooperation and what the opportunities for change are, and then provides very detailed options for policymakers to take forward. We've also put out the background paper that ODI helped to write for the big DFID conference, which was held in March, I think, which kind of is a source book on what's going on in the development world and climate change, urbanization, migration, and so on and so forth. There are lots of other materials from other participants here. You might want to find, if it isn't out, it'll be on the website, the blog I did last week, which summarizes the EU's April development package, which summarizes what the EU wants to do in response to the crisis, rolling out budget support, getting a Doha trade deal, common position on climate change, various other things. And a lot of our discussion today will be about institutional issues, but underlying those are the substantive policies that need to be taken in order to make sure we keep moving forward on development. Apologies for speaking so long. Martin, would you like to come and take the floor?